Your heart is racing right now, just thinking about someone. Your palms are a little damp. Your brain has flooded itself with chemicals you did not choose and cannot fully control. This feels personal. It feels like it belongs only to you, only to this moment. It does not. For roughly 300,000 years, human beings have felt this exact same rush, same chemicals, same racing heart, same inability to think straight. The stage has changed completely. The wiring underneath it has not changed at all. So what did falling in love actually look like 50,000 years ago? Not the campfire cliché, not the caveman drags a woman by the hair cartoon. The real thing. And the real thing is stranger, tenderer, and far more calculated than you probably imagine. Let's start with the brain, because that is where love actually lives. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent years putting people who had just fallen in love into fMRI scanners. She wanted to see what romantic love actually looked like inside a human skull. What she found was not a vague, warm, fuzzy feeling. It was a specific, targeted, almost addictive activation pattern in the brain's reward circuitry, the same regions that light up with cocaine. Dopamine surges. Focus narrows to a single person. Sleep gets harder. Appetite gets weird. Fisher's conclusion was blunt. Romantic love is not just an emotion. It is a drive, built by evolution, as fundamental as hunger or thirst. And Fisher did not stop at the falling in love part. She went further, scanning the brains of people who had recently been rejected by a partner. Their brains lit up almost identically to someone in the grip of addiction withdrawal, craving, obsession, physical pain response. Heartbreak, it turns out, is not a metaphor. Your brain treats losing a partner the way it treats losing a substance it has become dependent on, which means the ache you have felt after a breakup is not weakness. It is a 50,000-year-old survival circuit, doing exactly what it was built to do, just aimed at the wrong century. Drives that fundamental do not switch on overnight. They get built slowly, generation after generation, because they solve a real survival problem. Here is the problem they solved. A human baby is helpless for years, not weeks, like most mammals. Years. It cannot walk, cannot feed itself, cannot defend itself, cannot even hold its own head up for months. Raising a child like that alone, on the open savanna, while also gathering food and staying alert for predators, is close to impossible. So evolution needed a way to keep two adults locked onto each other, at least long enough to get one vulnerable child through infancy. Paleoanthropologist Owen Lovejoy proposed exactly this. Looking at fossils of Ardipithecus ramidus, a human ancestor over 4 million years old, Lovejoy noticed something strange. The males had unusually small canine teeth for a primate. Small canines usually mean less violent male-to-male competition over mates. Lovejoy's theory was that early hominins were shifting towards something closer to pair bonding, males and females forming lasting attachments, males provisioning females and offspring with food, instead of a system built entirely on physical dominance. In other words, love, or at least the biological seed of it, may be older than your species, older than fire, older than language. Primatologist Bernard Chappé pushed this idea further. He argued that pair bonding did something even bigger than protect individual children. It stitched entire social groups together. When a man and a woman formed a lasting bond, it created a web of in-laws, of connected families, of people who now had a reason to trust and cooperate with total strangers because of a marriage. Chappé called this the hidden architecture of human society. Before governments, before laws, before written contracts of any kind, the pair bond may have been the very first piece of social infrastructure your species ever built. So love was not just about two people. It was, quietly, political. It also was not only about two people practically. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes proposed what is now known as the grandmother hypothesis, built on close observation of the Hadza in Tanzania. She noticed that older women, long past their own childbearing years, spent enormous amounts of time and effort gathering food for their grandchildren. This freed up younger mothers to have more children sooner, spaced closer together, because they were not solely responsible for feeding every mouth themselves. Hawkes argued this single behavior might explain why humans, almost uniquely among mammals, live for decades after menopause. Grandmothers were not a burden on the group. They were, in a very real evolutionary sense, part of the machinery that made human childhood and human love survivable in the first place. A pair bond between two young adults was never really just between two people. It sat inside a much wider net of mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and cousins, all quietly propping the whole structure up. Not every early human relationship fit a neat, permanent mold, either. Primatologist Agustín Fuentes has pushed back against the idea that strict lifelong monogamy was the only, or even the dominant, arrangement across early human history. Fuentes points out that human mating and bonding patterns were likely flexible, shaped heavily by local ecology, group size, and available resources, sometimes closer to monogamous pairing, sometimes involving more fluid or overlapping relationships, cooperative in different configurations depending on what a specific environment demanded. The common thread was not one rigid rulebook for love. It was cooperation, attachment, and shared care for children, expressed through whatever social structure a given group of ancestors had settled into. It helps to understand what is actually happening at the chemical level, because the story gets stranger the closer you look. Researchers studying pair bonding in animals, most famously the prairie vole, a small rodent that forms lifelong partnerships in a way most mammals do not, found that two hormones drive the entire process. Oxytocin, released during touch, closeness, and intimacy, and vasopressin, linked to protective, monogamous behavior in males specifically. Block those hormones in a prairie vole, and the bond never forms. Boost them artificially, and a vole will bond with almost anyone nearby. Humans run on strikingly similar chemistry. That flood of closeness you feel after physical affection, the calm that settles in after a long hug, the fierce protectiveness some people describe feeling almost instantly toward a new partner. These are not just feelings. They are the same ancient molecular machinery that binds a vole to its mate, dialed up by a much larger, much more complicated brain sitting on top of it. Now picture it directly. You are in your early 20s. By the standards of your group, this makes you fully adult, already years into gathering, hunting, or crafting tools. You know your small band of 20, maybe 30 people, the way you know your own hands. Everyone's face, everyone's voice, everyone's habits. Strangers are rare and usually significant. So when your group crosses paths with another band, at a river, at a seasonal gathering ground, during a shared hunt, something shifts in the room. New faces, new voices, unfamiliar scent, unfamiliar rhythm of speech. This mattered enormously, and not just emotionally. Population geneticists have long pointed out that small hunter-gatherer bands could not survive by only mating within the group. Genetic diversity required outside connection, so these encounters were not accidental. They were often deliberately arranged, timed around seasons, resources, or ritual. Falling for someone outside your immediate circle was not just romantic. It was, quietly, how the species avoided collapsing in on itself. You would not have called it a date. There was no dinner reservation, no swiping, no profile to read beforehand. But there would have been proximity, shared tasks, working a fire together, learning to throw a spear from someone who was clearly showing off a little more than the task required. Attraction, back then, ran on the same signals it runs on now. Confidence, competence, a voice that sounds calm under pressure. Someone who is generous with food when food is scarce, because that single behavior told you everything about what kind of partner and what kind of parent they might become. There would have been dancing too, and music and firelight. Anthropologists studying living hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Juhonzi of the Kalahari, have documented exactly this. Large seasonal gatherings, sometimes drawing in hundreds of people from scattered bands, built around shared dancing, singing, and storytelling late into the night. These gatherings are, among other things, the closest living analog to a prehistoric singles event humanity has ever run, and they have almost certainly existed in some form for tens of thousands of years. Firelight hides flaws and flatters faces. Rhythm synchronizes heartbeats between strangers. If you wanted to design a system for making two people fall for each other quickly, you could barely improve on a night around a fire with music and dancing. And once attraction sparked, courtship likely followed a familiar shape, adjusted for the tools available. A well-made spear point, offered as a gift, was not just a tool changing hands. It represented hours of skill, patience, and knowledge, a demonstration of exactly the kind of competence a future partner or a future parent would need. Sharing a difficult, prized piece of meat with one specific person, instead of distributing it evenly, was a public signal, visible to the entire band, of who mattered most to you. In a small community where everyone watched everyone, there was no such thing as a private crush. Falling in love was, in a very real sense, a public event. There is a burial site in Russia called Sunghir, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, that quietly supports all of this. Two young individuals were found buried head to head, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads, an ornamentation that would have taken enormous time and skill to produce, likely months of labor from multiple people. Archaeologists still debate exactly who they were to each other, but the burial itself tells you something undeniable. Whoever they were, someone loved them enough to spend an extraordinary amount of effort making sure they were honored, together, in death. That is the twist most people do not expect. We tend to imagine prehistoric life as purely functional, all survival, no softness. Grunt, hunt, sleep, repeat. But the archaeological record keeps pushing back against that. Elaborate burials, matched grave goods, evidence of long-term pair bonds among early humans, and even, some researchers argue, among Neanderthals, our close evolutionary cousins, who buried their dead with flowers and tools long before modern humans arrived in Europe. Tenderness is not a modern invention layered on top of a cold, mechanical past. It appears to be baked into the species from very early on. Anthropologist William Jankowiak wanted to know whether romantic love, the head over heels, can't eat, can't sleep version, was actually universal, or whether it was a strange invention of modern Western culture, as some earlier researchers had assumed. He and a colleague reviewed data across 166 different cultures around the world, from industrial nations to small-scale traditional societies with little contact with the outside world. Romantic love, with all its familiar intensity, showed up in the overwhelming majority of them. His conclusion reshaped how anthropologists think about human relationships entirely. Romantic love is not a cultural invention. It is closer to a universal feature of being human, expressed differently depending on the customs around it, but present almost everywhere researchers have thought to look. That intensity did not always guarantee forever, either, and prehistoric relationships were probably not the simple, permanent unions we sometimes imagine. Bonds broke. People grieved. New partnerships formed, sometimes bringing children from a previous relationship into a new family structure, something anthropologists now call blended provisioning, ancient stepfamilies solving the same emotional and practical puzzles families solve today. The specific arrangement varied enormously across different early human groups. What stayed constant was the underlying ache and pull that made people seek connection again, even after loss. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little. Your racing heart, your inability to focus, the way you keep checking your phone, hoping they texted back. None of that is New Age technology hijacking your brain. It is 300,000 years of evolutionary pressure, expressing itself through a phone screen instead of a fire circle. The dopamine does not know the difference between a message notification and a returning hunting partner walking back into camp. Your nervous system is running ancient software on modern hardware, and it has no idea the hardware changed. Even jealousy, the ugly, uncomfortable feeling most people are ashamed to admit to, likely served a purpose back then. In a small band where a partner's attention meant survival resources for you and your children, a flare of jealousy was an early warning system, a signal that a valuable bond might be at risk. It is not a pleasant feeling today, watching someone's eyes linger a little too long on someone else. It was not a pleasant feeling 50,000 years ago either. But it was, and still is, information, your ancient nervous system trying to protect something it has decided is worth protecting. Think about what you actually do when you like someone today. You check your phone compulsively, hoping for a reply. The same dopamine circuit lighting up that once made your ancestors scan the horizon for a returning partner. You get dressed a little more carefully before seeing them. The same instinct that once drove someone to spend hours carving a bead necklace or perfecting a spear point as a courtship gift. You laugh a little louder at their jokes in front of other people. An old, public signal, the same kind that once told an entire hunter-gatherer band exactly who mattered to you. Even the arranged nature of modern dating, apps that sort strangers by location and shared interest, is not as far removed from the seasonal gathering ground as it might feel. Your ancestors needed a mechanism for meeting people outside their immediate circle too. They just used a river crossing and a dance instead of a screen. The heartbreak feels just as ancient. When a relationship ends today, the loss of appetite, the intrusive thoughts, the physical ache in your chest that people have described for thousands of years across every culture ever studied, All of it maps almost perfectly onto what Fisher observed in the brains of rejected lovers. Your body is not overreacting. It is treating the loss of a bonded partner the way it evolved to, as a genuine threat to your survival, because for most of human history, it genuinely was one. So the next time your heart does something ridiculous over someone, you can laugh at yourself a little, but also understand what is actually happening underneath it. You are not being irrational. You are running one of the oldest, most successful programs your species has ever built, the same one that stitched together entire prehistoric communities out of strangers, kept two people close enough, long enough, for a helpless human infant to survive its first, most fragile years, and quietly kept doing that for every single generation between them and you. Your heart is racing right now, just thinking about someone. It has been racing like this for 300,000 years. This time, it is you.